Or you got a little bait and switch. I actually put that bad abstract in there. I'm not kidding. So hey everyone, Stephen Augustus, technical architect at Bloomberg, office of the CTO. A little bit about me. That's me. That's an older version of me. I'm currently on the OpenSSF Technical Advisory Council, which means that this council is responsible for kind of general oversight of all of the projects within the Open Source Security Foundation. I'm one of the steering committee members for OpenSSF Scorecard, as well as one of the maintainers. And there are a lot of other things that if you really want to know deeply about all of the hats that I have on, augie.dev is where I'm at on the internet. You'll get social links, you'll get links to old talks and all that good stuff. So, Scorecard. What is Scorecard? What are we currently in the? So the OpenSSF has a maturity model. So if you're familiar with CNCF projects, anybody familiar? CNCF projects, super awesome, right? So you kind of know that those graduation phases of sandbox, incubation, and graduated projects. OpenSSF does something similar. So we are currently at that kind of second phase and working towards graduation right now. If you want to know about what incubating projects are, little description right there. So what does Scorecard do? What are we trying to do? We're effectively trying to analyze and derive some heuristics around trust, right, within projects, right? And I think you are empowered to use this data however you want to use it. I think a lot of the conversations that we've had in the past around Scorecard have been, hey, Scorecard hasn't given me the results that I want for this thing, or this package manager isn't supported, so my score is lower, and I'm very upset about that. Like, yes, Scorecard currently has 3 maintainers. So currently 3 maintainers, 300 plus issues on GitHub, but also 4,000 plus stars and forks and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of traffic. There are just a few people doing it. It is not meant to be the be-all, end-all tool to solve security for your repositories. It's important to realize that any tool that you use within the security landscape, or really in general, realize that it may be purpose-built for something, right? And that purpose may evolve over time, but that does not necessarily mean that it's going to solve everything for you, right? If you're familiar, security is an onion. There are lots of different things that you have to do to secure your repositories, to secure your build pipelines, and one tool is not going to do it. So it's on recording. Scorecard is not necessarily going to be the tool for you. If it works for you, if you're interested in discussing use cases around how it can better work for you, happy to hear them. You will see some details about how you can get in contact with us towards the end of the slide. But yeah, let's keep going. So what I just said, it's not supposed to be the be-all, end-all solution. And I think a lot of people have, so Scorecard, the way it works, you run a tool. There are various ways of running the tool, which we're going to get into, ways of running Scorecard not at scale and then kind of running it at a wider scale. You will get a list of scores based on certain checks. So it may check for dependencies, whether or not you have a dependency update tool, whether or not you have licenses applied to your repo, whether or not you're using, whether or not you've got binary artifacts checked in to your repos. So it'll flag certain things. And then there's an aggregate score. A lot of people have given us the feedback, and we're kind of working through how we want to tackle this, that the aggregate score is not super useful. I agree. It's not super useful. I think we might move to something of a color system, or just to give you an idea of like, hey, this is a repo that is at risk. You should really dig into what's going on here, or this is a repo that you can generally feel comfortable about and move on with your day, right? So, Scorecard, the universe. Scorecard universe. So we have had recently a lot of, so Scorecard started off as a project worked on by Ghost, the Google open source security team. So both Scorecard and All-Star came in as separate projects into the OpenSSF. And this was kind of born from a need of the Google's OSPO being able to analyze the security of projects that they might be releasing or bringing into, bringing in internally, right? So first things first, we've got the Scorecard CLI. This is kind of some of the output that you might see from Scorecard, and it will output as a chart, and you can see some of the checks that I mentioned, so binary artifacts, branch protection, CI tests. Are you running CI tests before you're actually merging code? It'd be really cool if you did, right? code review process is, whether or not, who where the contributors are coming from within your project, right? Now, I say your project, but we're going to get into the different personas that you might be approaching a tool like Scorecard from, right? So first, CLI, pretty simple. You grab the thing. We've got a binary. You can run a Docker container. You can run a OCI compliant container, excuse me, and get these scores. It'll output as a table. That's great. That's great for one repo, right? Usually we're thinking a little bit bigger than one repo, right? There's a GitHub action. Pretty cool. All right. Similar idea. We are running as a OCI compliant container within a GitHub action. It runs as a cron. You can decide that you want to run it very frequently. By default, it'll run very infrequently, every week or so. But you can ratchet that how you want to, right? Not too many. The permissions are not aggressive. I will note that the responses that you will get from the scorecard are dependent on how many permissions you give the workflow, right? So if you want to introspect on something like branch protection, you need to have access to the repo to actually glean those settings, right? So you'll have to ratchet up. And we do give instructions on how to generate a personal access token, or if you want to run it in a different workflow or as a GitHub app, we give you instructions on how to do that too, right? So we've got the CLI. We've got the GitHub action. We've got Scorecard Visualizer. Let me see if I can just jump over here. Cool. You want to see repo? What's going on? So we have both Scorecard Visualizer as well as some of the API documentation. And so again, this is the check. This is the score for the check. And again, great example here. I don't have access to Guac's internal settings. So I can't actually tell what its branch protection score is, right? Here is the scorecard.dev visualizer, pretty similar. Scorecard API Visualizer is a project that was donated to the larger Scorecard. We're now calling it the universe. So Scorecard Action, All-Star, the Scorecard Monitor, and then the API Visualizer. But again, you can see that aggregate score, some information about the repo. You can sort by risk level, the check names, et cetera. And we may consider moving to something like, hey, the overall risk of this repo is it's a critical repo. It's high risk, or it's a low risk check, right? So back to the presentation. If I could figure out what tab. All right, cool. Visualizer. Now let's talk a little bit about running Scorecard on more than one repo. First things first, if you have never heard, how many people have heard of All-Star? Sick, I love that. So All-Star is a pretty cool tool. All-Star will give you, All-Star allows you to effectively run reports and checks around various aspects of your repo. One of them, like branch protection, do you have that enabled? Do you have a security MD file? Things like that, right? But All-Star also allows you to run under the covers, and just to show you an example, it's a pretty simple config file for All-Star, runs as a GitHub application, but we can see here we've got a few checks configured, we've got a few checks commented out, and these are effectively the scorecard checks so this is a subconfig, so All-Star, the larger All-Star config is split into binary artifacts check, branch protection check, dangerous workflows, whether or not you have outside collaborators, security MD, and then finally that scorecard YAML config. So you can actually configure scorecard checks here, and if you run it via All-Star, that means that you can run this across a GitHub organization instead, right? And then you can start thinking, or repo level, organization level, multi-org level, especially if you've got this app running on multiple orgs, right? So what this might look like, here is a security policy violation for a fake repo that Jeff created. And it gives you some information. Hey, this project is not being fuzzed. I can't find a license file. I don't know how well maintained it is. Please look at the commits, it's not, dependencies are not pinned, et cetera, and we walk you through some of the remediation steps. The All-Star will also give you information about how to get to the scorecard documentation, which is here, and it talks about all of the checks, the risks for the checks, and how to walk through some of those remediation steps. So that's All-Star. We also have the Scorecard API. So I mentioned the Scorecard API very briefly. So we have a Google GCP project. There is a BigQuery. There's a quite large BigQuery situation happening where we scan on the order of 1.2 million plus repositories. We started off with some of the critical, what were considered critical repositories, and have scaled out basically anyone who is interested in adding their project to this very large CSV. We're going to figure out how to fix that later. But anyone who's interested in adding their project to the weekly scan, we run scans in the background every week. You can query against this BigQuery data set as well. And for anyone who's running the scorecard action, we will publish the scorecard action will publish the scores to the table as well, right? So you have an opportunity to introspect any if you're either adding a project to the cron job or adding a project via the scorecard action, we will get your scores and publicize them, right? Now, Scorecard Monitor. Scorecard Monitor is another project that was donated to the wider Scorecard universe. Scorecard Monitor, I think, is pretty cool. And it basically allows you to, if you have your scores published in any way, again, either via that API or if you're doing the GitHub action, it can detect that your repo has been scanned, and it will show you basically the repos across your org, their scores, how the scores have drifted over time. If there are remediation steps involved in bringing your repo scores up, you can actually click a button and fix it. And so the step security folks have worked on some of this, and there are some direct links out to using the secure repo tools that they have. Cool. Now, so Jeff took some time. So Jeff, my co-presenter, which is, he was not actually available for this talk. I'm doing this talk by myself. But Jeff and I gave this talk at Sauce Fusion last year. So this is just a slight modification of it. Jeff worked on proof of concept, which I'm trying to bring to the finish line, of effectively thinking about what does multi-scorecard look like, right? So we've talked about some of those techniques for running scorecard at scale. We've talked about some of the not at scale techniques. I think one of the problems that we run into is the fact that we have so many tools. We have tools that are written in, JavaScript and TypeScript, and Go, the core scorecard code base is written in Go. We have friends at the CNCF who have written Clo Monitor. Under the covers is using a bunch of scorecard checks for the security aspects of it. Clo Monitor is written in Rust. So it's a polyglot ecosystem, and trying to figure out what the right pieces of that ecosystem to bring together under the same roof. Is it supposed to be a spec? Is it supposed to all be rewritten in Go? Are we going to bring the front end out into TypeScript, et cetera, right? So we're still kind of working through exactly how that's going to work. But Jeff wanted to kind of take, what if I could run Scorecard as a GitHub app and connect Monitor and Visualizer into many scorecard results, right? So theoretically, what a small query would look like, a small query data set, right? And this local model, I think if we get away from the laptop, right? This local model becomes, well, local can be anything, right? Local can mean I ran this in my Kubernetes cluster. Local can mean I ran this as a one-shot within, GKE or App Engine, right? So the possibilities of we want to bring scorecard to the people. Is it you should deciding that scorecard should be run as All-Star, right? Exclusively, right? And we should get rid of the GitHub action, So we're still investigating. But if you want to check out any of this proof of concept, I'm giving links. I am not going to tempt the demo gods as the last talk and and new laptop, etc. But I've given the branches. So we're starting to draw this together into feature branches that can be published. If anyone wants to check them out, multi-scorecard for the Scorecard repository that allows you to use GitHub app credentials and installations to kind of list out and run Scorecard against them. And then we're kind of thinking about taking the scopes.json idea from Scorecard Monitor and seeing if we can kind of bring that into the Scorecard project overall, right? So hey, your scope is this many orgs, great, go run the tool, right? And whether you want to run that as CLI, in your Kubernetes cluster, in your All-Star application. You can even write across your, right on top of the All-Star GitHub app installation that you already have, right? And then for the monitor and visualizer hacks, which I have PRs open, and it's egregious if you want to go look at what they are, but they are available. Local results are the branches. They are published online. So when you're analyzing results, what do you want to look for, right? And I think that really depends on who you are, right? So how many people in the room are consumers of open source projects? Yeah. All right, how many people are project maintainers or staff? Okay, all right. How many people are responsible for assessing risk in some way, whether this is in your foundation, your company, et cetera? Okay, all right. So when we were initially giving this talk, I happened to be all three. I kind of am still all three. So I ran the open source strategy and open source program office for a little company called Cisco. And we had this issue. The reason that I started contributing to Scorecard was because I had all of these problems. I wanted to be able to assess the risk of projects that we were, one, considering using internally, and then two, publishing, right? Who you are in this equation will kind of determine what checks are important to you, right? So I think we've had some conversations in the community around, well, Scorecard really seems geared towards maintainers, or Scorecard really seems geared towards consumers. Can you make that clearer? Let Scorecard be what you want it to be, right? Take the things that are useful. You don't have to take all of the things. That's fine. Right, so you should run Scorecard because it is useful to you. And again, to remind you that it is not going to be the thing that solves all of your problems, right? Understand what role you want to play in the scenario. And I think some of the ways to do this is you may run Scorecard Monitor. I think Scorecard Monitor is a great opportunity if you're not at scale just yet, to take a look at everything that you're running within your repos and just get a lens of like, oh, wow, I realize that I'm failing, pretty consistently failing license checks. That's an easy fix, right? Think about the licenses for your projects, right? And try to detect trends and bring this into remediation of trends as opposed to remediation of individual repository problems, right? Good way to not fail the license check as frequently. Hey, create an OSS template within your GitHub org, right? Every time someone creates a new repository that you're publishing, you have a security MD, you have a code of conduct file, you have a contributing file, right? And you edit those as needed. Guess what? Every time those repos are scanned, your check will score high, right? Same with the security.md check. Think about leveraging tools like GitHub reusable workflows, right? As you're building GitHub Actions, you have the opportunity to replicate the way that you're building those actions out across repos, and that's another way to fix that, right? So we really want to be able to engage repo owners at scale and not on an individual basis. I think Scorecard Monitor and Scorecard Monitor, All-Star, and the Visualizer are some good tools to do that. So. Now, what could happen with this multi-scorecard future? As I mentioned, like this may be as simple as just adding a new flag to Scorecard CLI. It could be a container. It could be a replacement for the GitHub action altogether. Helm chart, new GitHub actions, who knows, right? I am curious to hear feedback about how you want to see this implemented. So really, if you have not used Scorecard in the past, take an opportunity to run the CLI tool. Take an opportunity to add it to your repositories. The previous speakers were asking if there were any people who had open source projects that they wanted to plug Scorecard. Yeah, go check out Scorecard. I think that's cool. Again, there are some problems that we have to solve. I think one of the biggest ones is that we have so many tools, so many people trying to do the same thing with these tools from a slightly different lens, and they're all written in different programming languages. I am not a polyglot. I'm not that much of a polyglot, I'd say. So that is hard to maintain over time. So we need to find something that works for the community and works for us as maintainers. If you're interested in contributing to Scorecard even, I would love to talk to you. Right? So that's me on the internet again, augie.dev. If you want to connect with the Scorecard community, OpenSSF/Scorecard, connect with the Scorecard community. That's going to give you links to our community meetings, our meeting notes. There's a meeting note archive within our governance folder, and then you can catch us on the Scorecard Slack channel. If you want to see larger ways to get involved with the OpenSSF overall, happy to chat. But there's also the Get Involved link at openssf.org. Any questions?
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen.